We returned to the parish, and I told my supervisor, who was also a priest, and nothing happened. What I found out since is that my supervisor was also a pervert in that he played around with mentally ill teenage girls. So drawing attention to my statement would draw attention to him, and so nothing happened. And so I called every rape crisis center in the city of Boston, and no one would talk to me because I was a man. And in those days, 1970, no one believed that a man could be a victim of rape or sexual abuse. So I did the Irish thing, and I just lived with it. I couldn't tell my family. There's no way. My mother would be crushed. My father would have a heart attack and die on the spot. I don't know if he'd kill the priest first, but anyway. So I just lived with it. I went through with ordination. I decided I had 9 months to rediscern 8 years worth of examination of conscience and, should I be ordained? Can I be ordained? What am I getting into? Are they all like this? And just all these unknown questions. I went through with ordination, but I became very, very private. Beforehand, I was very outgoing. I was a social butterfly of the class, if you will, getting guys together during the summertime, going to theaters and whatever. And now all of a sudden, I'm just pushing people away. In the mid-'70s, the American Psychiatric Association made the statement that those who were victims of abuse could become abusers. Well, I heard would become. And that put me in a situation where I built walls around me so thick and so high that no one was going to get in, no one was going to hurt me again, and I was not going to hurt anyone else. And so I basically came down to a theology of God in me, and this priestly brotherhood that they talk about, I didn't feel it. I couldn't trust them. I was hurt by at least 2 of them at this point. I didn't want to do it again, and so I just stayed away, and I just became very personal and very, very much a loner. In 2001, I was at the Washington Hospital Center, and I was a chaplain there. And I was going through some intense training to be certified nationally as a hospital chaplain. And in the midst of that is a lot of interpersonal deep soul searching, and I had a flashback. And I fell apart. I mean, I just couldn't believe what was happening. So I told my family for the first time, and they've been very supportive. I called Boston to talk to Cardinal Law, who was my bishop at the time. And it took me 5 months to get an appointment. And finally we met, and I had sent 7 pages ahead of me explaining my story and why I wanted to meet with him. And he had not read them, And I'm saying, I don't believe this. And so I had to go through the whole story. At the end, he turned to his secretary and said, well, we'll have to get Tony and talk to him. And then turned to me and said, we'll pay for your counseling. And I'm sitting there and I'm saying, where am I as a good priest? Where am I as one who has suffered? Where am I as one who's been a victim, who's been abused? And, there was nothing. There was nothing personal in it. And I'm saying to myself, if they treat a priest this way, how do they treat lay people? So from then on, I stayed in ministry from 2001 until about 2006. And at that point, I was just so frustrated, theology-wise, with the bishops and the cardinals of the church that I could not represent them. The idea of apostleship is when you are sent as a messenger, you're not just a messenger, you become the person who sent you. And so the bishops ordain us and send us to preach the good word, and I become and stand for everything the bishops say and do. And in conscience, I couldn't do that. So I was granted a medical disability. Washington Diocese knew about this. When I announced it at the hospital chapel, within hours I was reported to the diocese, and the next morning they pulled my faculty, so I'm not able to function as a priest here in D.C. That brings me up to where I'm at now. I met some wonderful folks through SNAP, Survivors Network of those abused by priests, who are also open to other victims of sexual abuse as well. Also, Voice of the Faithful is another organization. I find more support and caring from those organizations than I do from my own church. But I didn't realize the effect that it had on me and our victims, that the trust is gone. We can't. I mean, if I gave a handshake to someone, they had gotten a lot out of me, because I just would not touch anyone. I didn't want it to get beyond that. And so my life has been kind of that way.
Thank you, Jim. Another painful story, and I appreciate your courage in sharing it with us. Wayne, I want to turn to you next and start by asking you a question. Were you also abused by a priest?
Actually, I was not. It so happened that my parents' best friends lived next door to them. I was raised in Four Corners, Maryland, Silver Spring, on Southwind Avenue, and they had a son whose name was Robert Smith, who was a professor at Cornell University. He was a doctorate at the age of 26, and my father thought that he was just the greatest thing that ever lived. And they put him on a pedestal, just like I'm sure Becky's parents put the priest on a pedestal. Mm-hmm. And any time that I could spend with him, my father was greatly appreciative of that, because he thought that his knowledge, mm-hmm. thinking back then, was that maybe some of the knowledge would rub off onto me. Mm-hmm. But one particular day, he asked my father if I could. He would come home on vacation for holidays like Thanksgiving and Christmas, and then he'd go back to school. And one of these holidays, he asked my dad if he could borrow me for the next day to help clean out their garage and their basement as a surprise for his father, as like a little gift. And my father said, "Sure, that would be great. You can spend the day with him." So, very excited that night. I couldn't sleep. I woke up the next morning early, got over it, and knocked on the basement door at 8 o'clock, and there was Bob greeting me with open arms. And he brought me in the basement and started talking to me, and he got on the subject of sex and fondling and all that sort of stuff. After 2 hours of that, he took me upstairs to the third floor bedroom, and we spent the rest of the day up there doing everything that you can possibly imagine, from oral sex to whatever else you can imagine would take place. And that was the beginning of about a 6-year relationship with Bob Smith.
And you were how old when this started?
I was 8 years old.
8 years old.
That was in 1953.
Okay. And can you describe what it was like for you to be in that kind of a situation with this trusted neighbor's son? What impact it had on your early life?
Well, if you can imagine this, at 8 years old, when somebody greets you with open arms and invites you in the house and puts his arms around you and tells you he loves you, he's fondling you and touching you, and then, like Becky said, it felt good, and I didn't know any different.
Right.
And it was our secret. Therefore, because it was our secret, I was never to tell anybody. I didn't tell my father.
Okay.
And that became the beginning of a long journey with me. That I realized I could lie and get away with it. And I knew I was in big trouble if he'd find out. He would absolutely beat me to death, I think, if he found out about it. So it came to the point that I lied about that and got away with it. And I started to lie about other things and get away with it. Even to the point when I got a little older, I would cheat on my report cards. I would change the grades so that I would have better grades than what I made, and it would enable me to go out and do what I wanted to do rather than stay home and study all the time.
And did this cause you any disturbance in yourself early on when this sexual behavior was going on? And did you find a way to mask that in any way?
Well, when I turned 10 years old, and I still don't know how this happened, but one of the times that he came home for vacation, he would call me on the phone and say, "I'm coming over," or "Would you like to come over?" And it got to the point that I knew this was wrong, and I really didn't want to go there. And I got nervous. I got scared. And I somehow discovered my parents' liquor closet. And before I went over that day, I took 2 good swigs of liquor, and they gave me the courage to go over there that day. And that was the beginning of a long relationship with alcohol for me.
Okay. And what have been the effects on your life after the abuse stopped or so years later, when you were in high school or college and work life?
Well, when I finally started to realize that this was not the thing to do, it made me very nervous. I was living a double life. And when I got to be about 14, I got involved with sports in school, thank goodness. And I could use that as an excuse not to come home at night early enough. When he was there, he would say, come on over. And of course, I could say I had to stay after for wrestling or football or whatever. And I wouldn't go home. As you get older, as I got older, I continued to drink. I remember I was drinking pretty heavily in college. I got married and halfway through college. And when you're young and trying to go through school and start a career, you certainly don't want anybody to know about this. And you hide it. And
Right.
It's something that you hide, but you constantly think about it. I did anyway. It was constantly on my mind. I know that when I turned the windshield wipers on a rainy day and I saw those windshield wipers go back and forth, it was really not the windshield wipers I was seeing. I was watching Bob Smith jump over me naked in bed and jumping over on the other side. And that was a common thing that I would see through those years.
And did you continue to drink all this time through college and into your work life?
I did. And it got to the point that I would drink so much the night before that I would wake up in the morning and not really know what direction I was going into, where my car was going to take me. I was in sales. I was good at what I did, but I had a high ego and low self-esteem. And that was a result of doing a lot of drinking and a lot of lying at that time. And when I was 39 years of age, I finally joined Alcoholics Anonymous. And I've been sober since then.
And that's enabled you to be able to face the memories and to deal with the effects of the abuse in a starting way?
Pretty much so. That's one of the things. One of the things I'll never forget is Jim mentioned Voice of the Faithful. And I have a dear friend that was in that organization. And they said that they would like me to read an article that was put in the New York Times. And they gave me the article on one Saturday morning. I took it off my desk and I decided to read it. And it turned out to be an article about a fellow that was raped or was molested by a priest in New Jersey. And as I read the article, even though I wasn't molested by a priest, it was my story. It was my story, just in a different. The guy wasn't a priest; he was a college professor.
Right.
And I called him up immediately, the guy that wrote the article, and I met him about 3 months later down at Georgetown University at a book signing. And when he walked in the back of the church, I was in the front of the church, and we just had a feeling that we were both there. We walked and hugged each other, and he said, "Hello, brother." And that was the beginning of a long relationship of somebody that experienced the same thing I had.